Venezuela has a new president, sort of. This guy may be on his way out, but that depends on who you ask. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Be sure to subscribe and turn that notification bell on, because on America Uncovered, fake news gets real. Things have been a bit chaotic in Venezuela lately. And not just because the inflation hit 1,000,000% by the end of last year, and could hit 10,000,000% this year. I mean, at this point, what's a few million percent, give or take? In Venezuela, it's literally cheaper to use cash than toilet paper, which not only sounds really uncomfortable, it's also why you should never eat food from an unlicensed Venezuelan street vendor. Wait, what's the big story about again? Oh right, there's suddenly a new president, sort of. Okay, you probably already know about Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's president for the last 6 years, the one who tries to hide the fact that he's a corrupt dictator by dancing, and dancing, and dancing. And, okay, the people have had enough. No, seriously, they've had enough. Enough of the massive inflation, enough of the enforced weight loss programs, and enough of the police violence that's killed hundreds of protesters in recent years and 4 people just this past week. So now this guy stepped in, Juan Guaidó. You've probably never heard of him before this week because, let's face it, how many Americans can even name the U.S. Senate Majority Leader? It's Martin something, right? But that's essentially what Juan Guaidó is to Venezuela. He's the president of the National Assembly of Venezuela. So, like the U.S. Senate Majority Leader, but 54% younger and 97% less like a turtle. But Venezuela actually has 2 assemblies. There's the National Assembly, which Guaidó was elected to and is now head of. And then there's the Constituent National Assembly, which is a special government set up by Maduro and dominated by people from his United Socialist Party. That makes the original National Assembly a sort of opposition group. It's not like the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, which are both legitimate ruling bodies. It's more like the Great Schism of 1378, in which there were 2 popes who each claimed to be the legitimate pope. Or like the Great M&M Schism of 2000, when it was unclear which one was the real Slim Shady. So, Guaidó's assembly declared Maduro to be an illegitimate leader of Venezuela, because Maduro's re-election last May was widely condemned as a sham and a move towards further dictatorship. And then Guaidó was like, well, according to the Constitution, I'm the new interim president, and the professor from the hit Netflix show Money Heist is going to help me. And Guaidó was legitimately elected by the people, but he was elected as a member of the National Assembly, not as president. Nonetheless, he has a number of supporters in Venezuela who see him as a new hope for their country, the Venezuelan Luke Skywalker, if you will. I didn't say Rey, I'm not willing to be that controversial. Of course, Venezuelan politics, like politics everywhere, is complicated. And just because people don't support Maduro doesn't mean they support the opposition either. So at this point, Venezuela has anywhere from 0 to 2 presidents. And the rest of the world is forced to choose. Do we still recognize Nicolás Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela, or the relatively unknown Juan Guaidó? It's a topic for debate in every country. But the U.S. has come out strongly in favor of Guaidó.
Nicolás Maduro is a dictator with no legitimate claim to power. The National Assembly is the duly elected representative of the people, and through their constitutional system, and now the interim president, Juan Guaidó, it represents the will of the people.
And now the same position is backed by Canada and most of Latin America, including Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, basically everyone except Guyana and St. Lucia, which don't matter, and Mexico, which does. Mexico's left-leaning president has said he has a non-intervention policy. Oh, and Cuba, but that's not a surprise. Cuba's been supporting Maduro since before it was cool. Not that it was ever cool. So, most of the Western Hemisphere is now supporting the new Juan Guaidó. But will he really replace Maduro? there's still a lot we don't know. Will Maduro leave quietly, or will he use the military to put up a fight? And will the military continue to side with Maduro or break away? Will there be more bloodshed? How will this affect relations with the U.S.? After Guaido declared his interim presidency this past Wednesday, Maduro gave American diplomats 72 hours to leave the country. If Maduro does eventually step down or is forced out, how long will that take? Because only after that can Guaido seriously start trying to fix Venezuela's hyperinflation and food shortages. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that the U.S. will pledge $20 million of humanitarian aid to Venezuela to help with that. And how long will Guaido even be president? In theory, he's only an interim president until new elections are held. But historically speaking, people who get into powerful positions tend to not want to leave because they say they haven't been able to do all the things they definitely, totally plan to accomplish. So, there's still a lot we don't know and can't easily predict. It is interesting, though, to see how some Americans looking at what's happening in Venezuela are making assumptions based on the history of the U.S. in Latin America and also their dislike of the Trump administration, like Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who tweeted, "A U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela is not a solution to the dire issues they face. Trump's efforts to install a far-right opposition will only incite violence and further destabilize the region. We must support Mexico, Uruguay, and the Vatican's efforts to facilitate a peaceful dialogue." It's fair to say that the U.S. has had a checkered history with coups in Latin America. And yes, people might be worried about another Iraq or Libya. But to say that what is happening in Venezuela is a U.S.-backed coup is a stretch. Also, Guaido is not far-right opposition. He's a member of the Popular Will Party, a center-left social democratic party whose main leader was put in prison and then house arrest. Now, without U.S. support and recognition, the opposition, which has been heavily targeted by Maduro, wouldn't have been able to get as much international recognition as they have now. But the U.S. government isn't talking about U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. Ultimately, the fate of Venezuela is up to Venezuelans. And I know this is weird to say on a show called America Uncovered, but it's a mistake to look at what's happening in the world only through the lens of U.S. politics, which is how you get conservatives supporting a democratic socialist and progressives supporting a socialist dictator, and a former Mexican president supporting Trump. The world is a weird place, so we don't know how this will turn out. But with the U.S. and most of Latin America throwing their weight behind Juan Guaido, one thing is certain: something's going to change. And I hope it starts with importing toilet paper, because after food, toilet paper is Venezuela's number 2 problem. So, what do you think of Venezuela's newly declared interim president? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is funded mainly through direct viewer support, since YouTube doesn't place ads on videos it thinks are too controversial. So, please go to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered and support our show with $1 or more per episode, so we can keep making great content for you. Thanks for watching America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. Hey, guess which other extremely powerful country supports Venezuela? I did an entire episode about that on my other great channel, China Uncensored. Click here to check it out. Wait, which of us is the legitimate Chris Chappell?